All right, we will call the quarterly meeting of the Commission on Sentencing to order. Start by moving over to Professor Mystic for an announcement regarding the executive session.
Thank you, Chairman. During our last regular public meeting, it was a special public meeting actually, on July the 28th, the chair announced that the commission will be going into executive session at some future date in order to discuss personnel matters. On August 15th, that executive session took place and personnel matters were the topic of that meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Next, we'll open it up to any comments. Are there any public comments that you guys are seeing online?
If anybody does want to give public comment, they can raise their hand in Zoom.
We don't know if anybody was scheduled to.
Yeah, nobody
Okay.
is scheduled to. Nobody is raising their hands, so,
Somebody chimes in, please let us know.
okay.
Happy to hear any public comments. We'll move on to approval of the minutes from the June 2nd quarterly meeting. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the June 2nd, 2022 quarterly meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. I guess I went out of order.
That's all right. Might have been my fault, Chairman.
Either way. So I think you covered the August 15th meeting. Mark, is there anything regarding the July 28th meeting that we need to discuss?
No, this morning we discussed the this morning during our policy meeting and yesterday as well, we discussed the revisions of the sentencing guidelines, the preparation towards the 8th edition guidelines, and that was the subject of the July 28th meeting as well.
All right. We'll move on to the executive, administrative, and financial segment of the meeting. We are sad we are sad as a commission, but certainly happy for Judge Tucker, who has announced his retirement. And Judge, I know, I think I mentioned this to you before. Before we met, I had the opportunity to practice before your wife in federal court, and thought the world of her. And after having had the opportunity to work with you for the last couple of years, you know, just the two of you are just remarkable people who've dedicated yourself so much to public service, and your contributions here to the commission have just been outstanding and terrific. And I know I tasked you with working with that group of academics with historically Black colleges and universities, and the work product there was tremendous. So I just wanted to personally thank you for your contributions here to the Commission on Sentencing, and wish you well on your retirement. We do have a plaque here. I don't know, it's a little, I don't know how to put it so that you can see it, but we'll be sending it to you. But I certainly want to open the floor up to any other commission members who might want to offer remarks as well. Anybody else have anything to add?
Pleasure serving with Judge Tucker. It was always insightful, but all his experience to us here in the commission really gave us some good insights on the issues in Philadelphia that otherwise we wouldn't have had. So it's a pleasure working with him.
Super grateful for all of the extra time. Sometimes you hear quarterly, you do a meeting, you come in before, and to get involved as you did and with the academic group, and the tremendous amount of hours you put in, and the fruitfulness of all of that was just invaluable. So thank you. We will miss you. It's been a pleasure.
And Judge Tucker, Judge Daly, I will echo everyone else's thoughts and enjoyed working with you. And also your insight on the juvenile justice system was very helpful. And as Judge Marsko indicated, you know, coming from Philadelphia County, you certainly brought a great perspective to the Sentencing Commission. So you'll be missed. Thank you.
Judge, did you want to offer any comments?
I'll just say thank you very much for those kind words. It really was an excellent experience. Having been on the bench for about 17 years and in the district attorney's office for about 5 years and in private practice for about 25 years. A lot of this work that I've done was centered around criminal law. But I never really thought that much about what the commission does. And when the Chief Justice appointed me, I just thought this was just going to be another committee where we sat around and talked and moved on. But this committee is one of the hardest working committees that I've ever been a part of. And the staff is just so enlightful in terms of the things they do, the information they gather, ferret out everything and put it together in such an understanding way that it really is appreciative in terms of me, at least anyway. And candidly, I do not think that most of the judges throughout the Commonwealth who practice or who sit in criminal court have a clue as to the depth of what this commission does and how it's presented and the effect that it has on the work that they do. So again, thank you very much for those kind words, and I appreciate the friendship, the camaraderie, the thoughts that we've shared over the short time that I was on the committee, and I wish you all well. Thank you again.
Thanks so much, Judge.
Hey, Rep. This is Rep. Krajewski. I just wanted to really quickly chime in and say some words. I just want to thank you, Judge, for a lot of the support you gave me as a new incoming commission member, particularly, both of us coming from Philadelphia, being able to just talk with you and get to learn the ropes and a lot of the advice you're willing to share with me was really helpful. So I look forward to staying connected and wishing you the best in a much deserved retirement.
Thank you very much.
Judge, this is Mark Bergstrom. First, I want to echo everyone else's thanks to you for all of your work, especially the academic review panel, and then your assistance in helping us to foster a new relationship, particularly with Lincoln University. That's been incredibly helpful to the commission, and I just appreciate all of your efforts. I do have in my possession this plaque. So I'm going to be in Philly the next couple of weeks. So I'm going to try to see if I can stop by to drop it off. Otherwise, I'll have to trust the U.S. Postal Service. And I'll try to arrange with you to get it to you one way or the other. So thank you again.
Yeah, don't trust the U.S. Postal Service, please. Matter of fact, they're having hearings on them yesterday over at Temple. So I'll make myself available to receive the plaque.
Then I'll try to schedule a time to drop it off. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
All right. Well, I know we're going to miss Judge Tucker for sure, but we already have a new appointment to fill his shoes. So Judge McDermott, also from Philadelphia, who I know joined us yesterday for the discussion. And is she online here too now?
She is online.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So welcome, Judge. We look forward to working with you on the commission, and they're big shoes to fill, but I'm confident you'll be just fine and make several contributions as Judge Tucker has. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. And I know where to find Leon. So, I know I have big shoes to fulfill. And if he's not available, I can get the plaque to him. Mark knows. I don't know where he lives, but I know I could find out where he lives. So
Well, we appreciate that.
Thank you, Judge.
We'll move on to ex officio agency updates. Mark did send out the 2022 DOC recidivism report. I know I haven't had a chance to review it.
Right,
Judge
but-
Bernstein probably has read it 14 times.
And Dr. Brett Buckland from DOC is with us, and he can give a brief summary of the report and the work of the DOC.
All right.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Can you hear me?
He can. Yes. Good morning, Brett.
Thanks for giving me just a moment to share our report. We're pretty excited about it. It was a large effort. It's a 58-page report, jam-packed with a bunch of recidivism statistics in it. The last time we did a report like this was back in 2013. And this report we actually started 2 years ago, right before COVID in 2020. So it's been a long time coming to get this report out. A large group effort on the part of the research staff here at DOC. And we think it's going to create a lot of discussion and just has a lot of really good statistics in it. I'll just hit some of the highlights of it. Of course, we update our recidivism number every year, but this goes way beyond just one or two recidivism numbers. We look at recidivism from a number of different angles in this report. And as you might expect in any large report like this, we're looking at recidivism from a number of different angles. There's going to be some bad news and there's going to be some good news. So it really is a mixed bag in terms of recidivism performance and some of the outcomes that are measured in the report. First, I guess I'll give you the bad news from the report. So when we define recidivism, we define our one overall recidivism number as the first incident of either rearrest or reincarceration in a DSC facility within 3 years after release. So that's our main definition, although we have a number of different ways of measuring recidivism in this report that we look at. That's our one consistently main definition. And we look at that, it remains quite high. So about 2/3, 64%, meet that definition of recidivism. About 2/3 are going to either be rearrested or reincarcerated within 3 years after release. And one thing we did in this report too was also adjust that for the fact that, and this is something new that we haven't done before, adjusted for the fact that we know that some of our individuals get out and recidivate in other states, and that's typically not picked up in our recidivism. So they may go to, New Jersey, New York, when neighboring state, get arrested. We typically don't pick that up because we get our arrest records from PA State Police. So we have a new estimate in this report for out-of-state recidivism. And when we look at that and we combine that, that 64% actually goes up to 72% within 3 years after release. So that's really quite high. And then if we follow individuals 10 years after release, that goes up even further to 80% or higher. So, the recidivism rate remains quite high. And also, I would say that we found in the report, the recidivism rates have remained pretty consistent over a 15-year period. So there haven't been a lot of drops or increases one way or the other. We looked at recidivism measured by a number of different ways. So we looked at reincarceration, we looked at rearrest, we looked at a reconviction, at least 3 or 4 different definitions. And when we plot that over a 15-year period, it's pretty flat. It hasn't substantially decreased or increased one way or the other. We also estimated that about 1 in 10 of all arrests that happen in Pennsylvania are of someone that would previously had spent time in DOC. So that's also a pretty, impressive number that, 1 out of every 10 encounters that the police have where an arrest is made is of an individual that had spent time before in the DOC. And then there's the cost aspect. We have a whole section on the cost of recidivism in the report. And for the first time, we've tried to estimate using some national estimates of the cost of crime, especially a study that was done by the Rand Institute. We've estimated that recidivism costs Pennsylvanians about $3.1 billion per year. That's not just the cost of corrections. That's the cost of police. That's the cost of the courts. That's victim cost. There's all the costs that are associated with crime. When you look at those costs and then look at the number of recidivism incidents that happen in Pennsylvania in a year, the estimated cost is about $3.1 billion. So that's the bad news. Some of the more positive findings in the report, one thing that we looked at was that standard 2/3 recidivism rate that's quoted often, that I mentioned up front. Some academics have started to point to that and say that is a bit misleading because of the way that is calculated. And the way that is standardly calculated is by starting with individuals who are released from prison and following them for a period after prison. The problem with that is that release groups from prison overrepresent repeat offenders, churners. And so one example I think we give in the report that I like to give is, think about if we were doing a customer satisfaction survey of target shoppers online target shoppers. And so every time you went on Target's website, a survey popped up. The problem with that is that we know that there are people that like to shop at Target a whole lot. And so the survey results are going to be overrepresented by those repeat target shoppers. Similarly, the way that we traditionally calculate recidivism, it overrepresents repeat offenders, and it's not representative of the whole population that has spent some amount of time in the Department of Corrections. And so this is all academic, but when we adjust for this, then it looks like the recidivism rate drops back down from about 2/3 to about half, to about 50%. So still quite high, but lower than the traditional measures of recidivism. And neither are right or wrong. It's just different ways of looking at recidivism. We also tried to compare to the national average. The DOJ has issued several recidivism reports, the latest of which included 30 states in their recidivism estimates. So we tried to match their methodology. And when we do that for an apples to apples comparison, it looks like Pennsylvania is slightly below the national average. So that's a positive thing, that even if we're high, we are less high than the rest of the country, I guess. We're below the national average. Another encouraging thing is that for the first time, we're seeing racial disparities in recidivism eliminated. So historically, we saw about a 10 to 12 percentage point difference in race categories. And now the recidivism rates for example, for whites and blacks are essentially the same, equal in this report. So we're seeing, some reduction in racial disparities. We're also seeing some reduction in the seriousness of recidivism. So one way to measure this that we looked at in the report was the average offense gravity score for a recidivism incident, for all the recidivism incidents. And when we look at an old cohort, an old group of recidivists and a recent group of recidivists, it looks like the average offense gravity score is on average is lower more recently. And so that's a positive. Even if the recidivism rate hasn't changed, the seriousness seems to have been reduced in the recidivism incidents. And then the last thing that we looked at was we tried to introduce in this report a new concept called desistance. And this is another area where academics are talking a lot about this, but it hasn't really filtered down to the policy maker level yet. So, we spent probably the last 20 years just trying to get people familiar with the term recidivism, and it's even a hard term to pronounce. And now we're trying to introduce this new word, desistance. And in the crudest sense, desistance is really just the flip of recidivism. It's what makes people succeed. So recidivism is, what's the failure rate? Desistance is looking at success rates after prison, the flip side of that. And we looked at 3 different measures of desistance. We looked at deceleration, which is the rate at which people offend. Do they get arrested? So we found, for instance, before prison, they get arrested 7 times on average in a 10-year period before prison. And after prison, they get arrested about 2.5 times in the 10-year period after prison. So there seems to be a deceleration in the rate of offending, even if by a binary number, it's pass fail, they're failing at a lower rate. So that was deceleration. We looked at de-escalation, which again ties into the offense gravity score, and that's the seriousness of the types of recidivism. And that seems to be decreasing as well, as I mentioned. And then just cessation, which is those who stop, and we estimate about 20% stop altogether. So they're going to be released and never ever do anything again. And when we combine those 3 measures, what we find is that about 90% of those released meet one or more of those benchmarks of success. Either they slow down, they commit less serious offenses, or they stop altogether. So that paints a different picture than the 2/3 recidivism rate. It's a different way of looking at it, but it paints a different picture. So that was another main contribution, I think. There's a lot more that I won't go over the rest of it. I encourage you to take a look at it. We look at recidivism by demographics, by individual characteristics, by whether they have a substance use problem. whether they have a mental health problem, their education level. We also look at, for the first time, recidivism rates by individual prisons or state correctional institutions, as well as individual parole districts and areas of the state. And then we do have a page in the report where we summarize some of the program evaluation results most recently of programs intended to reduce recidivism and what some of those programs have found. So a lot of conversation starters with the report, we hope, a lot of information, and we're not trying to draw any policy conclusions from the report. We're really just presenting the numbers and offering it to a wide group of audiences, and hope that it will inform policy discussions going forward. So thank you so much for the opportunity to just give an overview. And again, please reach out if you have any questions on the report, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thanks, Brett. I just want to make sure I wrote something down correctly. So did you say that it's north of 80% of DOC individuals are rearrested or reincarcerated within 10 years?
That's correct. Yes.
All right. Well, I appreciate the information and certainly look forward to taking a deep dive into that report.
Thanks.
Any other questions while we're here? Professor Rego?
Just quick, first of all, thank you. It's a remarkable report, and you don't have to answer this now, but I'm just wondering generally, is there any county-specific lessons that could be drawn from this report? I'm sure the folks in Allegheny would be, and other counties, I'm sure, would be very interested in taking some lessons from this report. But is there anything county-specific do you think we could take from this, or is it still the big picture?
I would say it's mostly the big picture, although we do have recidivism rates by county, by committing county, the county that sentenced to DOC. And if you look at that map, what it seems to look like to me is that the central and western counties have higher recidivism rates than the eastern counties.
Interesting. Great
But
stuff.
there's a map in the report that shows recidivism rates shaded by each of the 67 counties, so you can see the darker shaded counties have higher rates.
Thank you for that. We were joking amongst the judges here about who was considered east and west and who's got the higher recidivism rates. But we'll look at the report and then we'll have some more commentary to follow. I have a follow-up question. Does anyone do this type of a report for the counties? And, taking a look at recidivism rates at county jails?
Yep. We haven't, but we talked yesterday about how difficult it is to do these studies and how it's going to be improved because of some of the work that is done with PSP. But it's really difficult to compile and analyze this. But some jails, I think, have done it.
Yeah. Our struggle historically has also been what the release date from the local jails are. So if you remember for the VUFA study, we're using minimum sentences our proxy just because we don't know if they're going back in and out or how that works. So obviously at the DOC level, we have more granular and reliable and valid information on entrance and exit dates from the institutions.
To the chairman's point, I think there's high value for the counties, but I hesitate to share it with all of our stakeholders because they may jump to conclusions that aren't ripe yet. But it's a great report, and I do look forward to sharing it with some of our stakeholders here.
Thanks.
All right. Moving on to the Board of Probation and Parole. I don't know if Chairman Johnson is with us.
I don't see him, but as I mentioned earlier, I know they have a retreat, their retreat scheduled, annual retreat scheduled next month. And I've been invited to participate in that retreat, and that'll be an opportunity to review both parole guidelines and work on the recommitment ranges with the board.
All right. Move along to the Executive Director's report.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll be sending some of this back to you pretty quickly for some action items. But I did want to mention that in the materials and during the discussions yesterday, during the annual planning meeting, we talked about some of the reorganization of commission staff, and particularly around the executive unit. So sort of redefining my position a bit and then creating a second deputy director position. So effectively, the commission will have two divisions, with one division that focuses on overseeing the research unit and the SGS Web application development unit, and the other deputy or division focusing on sort of the administration of the commission and education and outreach. So one of the efforts in developing the new MOU with Penn State was to articulate those three positions and then to put in place procedures for the commission to select an individual for the second deputy director position, and then to make sure all three of those executive unit positions would be appointed as clinical faculty members of Penn State, and then that the commission would be positioned to be able to determine which of those two deputies would be the senior deputy director in case the executive director is not present to sign off on things and so forth, and then also to designate a salary for each of those within the salary band that was approved. So all of those procedural things have been put in place and approved as part of the renewed MOU during the June meeting. And so now, as Professor Mystic said, the commission met in executive session to discuss some of this, and I'm going to turn it back to the chairman because there are three action items. First is the selection of an individual as deputy director for administration and outreach. Second is the designation of a senior deputy director. And the third is the assignment of salaries for those two positions.
So just to share with the group and the public, we, the vice chair and I and the executive director received, some resumes. We actually thought that the number of resumes was fairly sparse initially, so we went back out and sought some additional resumes, and then got really a more robust sampling, I guess, of folks that were interested in the deputy director position. We whittled that down to 5 interviews we conducted, for three interviews we conducted. I'll let the judge share her thoughts and Mark as well. But, one of the things, this is a pretty unique position requiring a fairly unique blend of skills and education and experience. And while there were some applicants, in my opinion, who may have excelled in one of those areas, they had a great educational background or some experience with some aspects of the job. There was really only one applicant in my mind who really fit the criteria that we were looking for, who had the requisite education and experience, met those qualifications, and that was Ryan Myers. I think when you looked at these candidates, some of them were very impressive, and actually some of them may fit other roles here within the commission. I mean, one of the things that we did discuss is hanging on to some of these resumes because there certainly were some impressive folks participating. But when you look at the specific skill set that this position requires, with Ryan's blend of experience here at the commission and the education that he has, and frankly, in my mind, he's demonstrated, certainly his capabilities to fill this role. I didn't think there was any real question that, in my mind, Ryan would be the appropriate applicant. I don't know, or the appropriate individual to fill the position. I don't know if you guys have anything additional to add.
Well, anybody who's part of this commission at any level understands the learning curve when you hop on, the complexity of everything involved. So when we were looking for individuals, we were trying to find somebody who's familiar with teaching and the educational aspect, has experience running those sides of things, but also someone who had a command of the sentencing guidelines. And even for lower level, for bringing in people who are doing some of the different trainings, who've had years of calculations, there was a learning curve, and there was really nobody who applied who on the sentencing side had much more than that broad understanding you have when you're looking at the matrix. And Ryan's just, it's very hard to have anything that's going to come close to 10 years of experience in the depths that he has. We wanted to make sure we cast it as wide a net as possible, which is why when we had a low amount of applicants, we then re-publicized it, but went to multiple other areas to get. And the reason you may wonder if we had 9 and then we had 3 additional, but there were certain things that we all talked about that we thought if they don't have these certain things, it's not worth doing a face-to-face interview, because just on paper alone, that's really, it just doesn't rise to the level of what we were looking for. So that's why we whittled it down to just 3 people that we did face-to-face with. But if you didn't know anybody, which we did, we knew Ryan, but if you had known none of them, you just said in his interview, I would say the legal term is, blew it out of the water, like he just, that's Latin. So, yeah, so I just don't think there's a comparison. And I do agree, boy, if any of these people have some interest in other positions, should they come available here, they were. And some people are doing some really neat things in the roles that they're in right now. That in fact, is one of them I think we could learn a lot from, and something they're doing in the county here in Pennsylvania. But so, yeah, I'm kind of reiterating a lot, but I think it's important to make a record for the public who's a part of this as to the depth we went to make sure we looked far and wide. But I just don't think the commission would be any better served than it would be if we had Ryan Myers take the deputy director position for the outreach and education.
Yeah, just a handful of comments, but it echoes what the chairman and vice chairman said about these other candidates. They were impressive candidates. I mean, on paper, but also during interviews. Everyone brought something to the table, a real strength in an area, either practice or understanding of criminal law, or of the administration of the courts, or of teaching in a college setting, or at least familiarity with the guidelines. But as the judge said, there was just a huge divide in terms of working knowledge of the guidelines, sort of the stuff we went through the last 2 days that was painful, but someone that knew and could work with that and could lead that effort, which is what's required as the deputy director. I think that was a key thing. But the other point is, should Ryan get this position, then there is the manager position of education and outreach, where some of these individuals had great qualifications. There's an open policy position with the commission there. So I think, as the judge said, we saw some great individuals, and we reviewed some great candidates. And I hope that some of these individuals are in the mix as we move forward on other positions, because they would help to build out the quality of the staff of the commission. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair, because we have to go through the formal process.
So I think we need a motion to, is it appoint, hire, designate?
Select, I think is the word.
Select deputy director, judge.
So I would motion to select Ryan Myers as the deputy director of administration and outreach.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All right, it's been moved and seconded to select Ryan Myers as the deputy director for administration and outreach. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's all the time we'll do. All right. I assume that they were a unanimous vote in favor of Ryan. Congratulations. Motion passes. All right. Now along, that would leave now 2 deputy directors. Mark, I don't know if you want to talk about this or not, but we thought it was important to designate one of you as the senior deputy director.
Yeah, and this is just, as I said before, when I'm not available, but there are things to be signed or decisions to be made, there needs to be a default. And it was pretty easy when there was one deputy to say who that was. So Matt's done a great job of that for 3 years or whatever now. But now that there's two deputies, it's important under our new procedures to designate one as the senior deputy director. And so I very much encourage consideration of Matt because of his experience and his time with the commission.
Yeah, so, I shared in that belief. I think Matt's done a terrific job. As the chair, I get to work with Mark and Matt on a lot of these issues on a more day-to-day basis, but certainly Matt is very well familiar and acquainted with the commission and has done terrific work. So I would agree with the executive director's recommendation there.
Sure. I didn't have one, Mike, because I agree with all of what you said. All right, so I would make a motion to designate Matthew Kleinman as the senior deputy director of the commission.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? Moved and seconded to designate Matthew Kleinman as the Senior Deputy Director of the Sentencing Commission. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Congratulations. And now, moving on to the salaries. Mark, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, so let me just give myself some sheet. There we go. When we restructured the executive unit and we worked on the job descriptions and the salary bands for approval or review by Penn State, what we looked at were comparable positions and salaries and other legislative and Commonwealth agencies and the existing salaries that we had in place. And the commission decided that there would be 3 salary bands for the executive branch or the executive unit. The first for the executive director would be $130,000 to $150,000 as far as the band. For the senior deputy director, the band would be $120,000 to $140,000. And for the deputy director position, it would be $110,000 to $130,000. So with those in place, and now with the designation of a deputy director, senior deputy director, I'll turn it back to the chair and the vice chair for specific recommendations regarding salaries within those bands.
Yes, my recollection is we discussed the fact that we didn't want to start at the bottom because of their experience level. And there was some calculation we did, and whenever there's numbers and calculations, that's, and I want to say it's 3.5.
Right. I think the discussion was, as the judge said, that based on the qualifications and the experience with the commission, the base of both of those ranges, so 110,000 and 120,000, was below what seemed appropriate. And I think we had, I think some of the members of the commission during the executive session talked about, percentage increases above that would represent their experience and their contributions to the commission. So I think that formed the recommendation regarding salaries.
All right, so is there a motion concerning the salaries for the senior deputy director and the deputy director?
Yeah, I would make a motion for the approval of the salary of the senior deputy director in the amount of $125,100, and also an approval of the salary of the deputy director of $112,800. Can we do those collectively in one motion? Okay.
All right, is there a second? All right, is there any discussion?
Who was the second?
Judge
Marsico. All right, it's been moved and seconded to set the salary for the senior deputy director at $125,100 and the deputy director at $112,800. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Congratulations, gentlemen. Well deserved on both counts. All right, moving on to
I can move through
Yeah,
those
go ahead.
other issues if you'd like. Okay, so just a couple of report issues. Brett will talk later about the recent hire of a new research analyst to fill out his unit. So he can report on that later. Under management and oversight, we talked yesterday about the staff organization. So check the record on that if you'd like. It's we'll have it out on YouTube too. But we have 3 vacant positions now, and so we'll be working on trying to post and fill those. Moving through the management and oversight, otherwise, no changes on diversity, equity, and inclusion, although I have had some contact with Lincoln University to try to look for opportunities to engage with them during this fall semester. Moving on to fiscal issues, the first is an action item, and all the materials there are in the documents that we provided. But the first is a closeout of the 2021-2022 budget. Jay Dean has completed those, and the materials are found in your the documents are found in your materials. With the closeout of the budget, we also would initiate the audit of that year. And you may recall that several years ago, we did a 3-year contract with Boyer and Ritter. We've done that for 2 years so far. So this is the third of those reviews. So we're asking for a motion to approve the closeout of the 2021 budget and the notification of Boyer and Ritter to initiate the audit.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Anyone?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to close out the fiscal year 2021-22 budget and notify Boyer and Ritter to begin the audit. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
And then some of these are just rote kind of discussions, but based on the appropriation we received, which is the 5.333 million, and the JRI2 appropriation, we have put together the operating budget for fiscal year 2022-2023. We had a draft of this during the June meeting that was approved, so this is just an update of that. One notice that I'll make, as I mentioned yesterday, the JRI funding is dependent on the cost savings to the DOC, and because of COVID, population's down, the cost savings are also down, or at least the cost savings attributed to JRI2. And so while we are authorized to receive up to $400,000, what we received in our appropriation was $152,000. So it is a shortfall of several $100,000. Fortunately, we did have some surplus, so we rolled that into our sort of savings, and we'll be using that as needed. But I think we built a budget based on what was appropriated. And so that's what's before you for approval as our operating budget.
Mark, just a quick correction. You said 5.22.
Yeah.
It said
5.3
No,
and
it's not
5.2.
2 points.
2 point, oh, yeah,
Sorry.
But the General Assembly would like to give us 5. No, $2.533 million. Thank you. But hopeful.
I have
So
a
a motion.
I have a question real quick, and I don't know, is Brett still on?
Yes.
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, Brett, have you guys done, has DOC done any work to try to guess where those JRI funds might end up this year? I mean, have you done any analysis in that regard to see whether we'll be back on track?
Well, the numbers are actually looking good. Part of the reason why we haven't seen the savings is because the larger savings are dependent upon actually closing a facility. When you get to that large of a savings, and there hasn't been a closing of a facility yet. So until that happens, we're not, even with the numbers up, we're saving at marginal cost, which is only about $30 a day. So, when you close a prison, you get a lot more cost savings. And that's really what it's contingent upon. But the numbers, like for instance, state drug treatment program, the numbers are up about, I think 15 to 20%. So it seems to be tracking in a good direction with the numbers. It's just dependent on the decisions made in terms of facility closings.
So at this point, we shouldn't really bank on the 400,000 for next year either. for this year either, I guess. Is it a safe assumption?
I would say so, yeah.
And that's one of the issues we raised both under JRI 1 and 2, that you know, our state appropriation is really what we look for stable funding for ongoing operations. And, you know, we saw the JRI 2 funds as to support the rebuilding of SGS Web, and certainly needed for that. We do have some savings, so that's helpful, but it is one of those concerns that if we're building a budget around funds that are not stable, that can create a problem. And I think it's something we have to look at for the upcoming state appropriation thereon, because we'll start dipping into some of that for operating costs, and I think that creates a little bit of a problem.
All right, so then, I know the notes here indicate approval of any modifications to the 2022-23 operating budget. There are none, right?
Well,
Or is that the change?
there is a modification because during June, we authorized a preliminary budget, so we need we took into account the end of year adjustments to each of the line items. So we modified it to accommodate the new budget. So we do need approval for modifications.
And at that point in June, we didn't know what the ending carryover would be for the fiscal year. Now we have firm numbers. We know we're carrying over from previous appropriations. If you look at the bottom, it's like $574,000 to add to the total budget. So the operating budget is less than what we proposed because of some salaries that weren't being funded, you know, during this time. But we have that listed as, you know, unbudgeted funds, so that we have more funds available than we will expend, but we don't know what's going to come up now.
Right. All right, is there a motion to modify the 2022-2023 operating budget as provided for materials as detailed by Mark? So moved, Jake. Is there a second?
Second.
Right. It's been moved and seconded to approve modifications to the 2022-2023 operating budget. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Great. And two other quick items. These are service purchase contracts. As you know, on generally an annual basis, we identify a student at Duquesne Law to work with Professor Mystic on providing legal research. In working with Professor Mystic, we've identified a student, Christopher Gowan, and we've identified some key projects for this year because we're trying to document some of and have a review of our personnel policies for commission staff and our operating procedures. And so we wanted to take a sort of a second look at all of those, and we think this student is the right student for it. So I'm requesting a service purchase contract in an amount not to exceed $5,000 for over the course of the next fiscal year. And it would be at a rate of $25 an hour, which is what we provide for legal research at Duquesne, and all work product and the hours would be approved by and supervised by Professor Mystic.
Is there a motion to approve the service purchase contract?
Make a motion.
Judge Burstyn. And second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? It's been moved and seconded to approve the service purchase contract with Christopher Gowan in the amount not to exceed $5,000 to provide legal research. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
And the final one is a service purchase contract with a student at Villanova Law for a continuation of a research project, Connor Mock, for an amount not to exceed $3,500.
Is there a motion? So moved. Judge Dowling. Seconded?
Second.
All right, Professor Rego. It's been moved and seconded to approve a service purchase contract with Connor Mock at Villanova University in the amount of not to exceed $3,500 for research internship. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it.
All right, great, thank you. Now we'll turn to Matt for the deputy director's report, for a deputy director's report. At least senior deputy director.
We're wondering if we're like attorneys general.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about that later.
Good, deputies. I like that.
So a number of the staffing issues we discussed yesterday, just about future projects and the roles, but I just wanted to note again that we're welcoming 2 visiting scholars to replace our previous visiting scholars starting October 3rd, the Christopher Thomas and you do. One will be our postdoctoral scholar in racial and ethnic fairness, which will continue to be a big part of our research agenda, is overlaying and making sure we pay particular attention to any disparities that come out in policies and practices and programs that we evaluate. Also mentioned yesterday that we're continuing our work with Reese Hester at Clemson University as a visiting scholar, and his insights and experience with prior record score and guideline construction, especially as it relates to the 8th edition guidelines. And we're welcoming Dr. Laura Beckman from Shippensburg University as our second visiting scholar. And I think that, consistent with yesterday, just to reiterate some of the kind of overarching themes of the research that these folks will be assisting with, is focus on racial and ethnic fairness, some of this work on cost benefit analysis that we've talked about for programs statewide, but part of our evaluations also locally. And then a particular emphasis, I think, in this coming fiscal year on these contextual and local policies and practices, which I think gets a little bit to what Professor Rago asked in the previous session, just about areas that we may be able to focus on regarding localities at the county level or across counties and regions. Related to the research partnership, I just want to make a sad note that I would like to note the passing of a former professor who worked with the commission for many years, Dr. Barry Rubeck, who is a professor of criminology and sociology. He's beyond serving as an advisor for many of the graduate students who were graduate students here at the commission. He worked on a number of projects, including the development of the risk assessment tool, and a project I noted yesterday on fines, fees, and restitutions. So I'd just like to turn it over to Mark.
Sure. This was a shocking loss over the summer. It was unexpected, and Barry was, worked with the commission, I think, for 10 years or more. He was an incredible researcher, and he was a great mentor for students that we had as grad assistants, but in the program generally. And he was, so it's a great loss. And it's also, he did, like Matt said yesterday, some really incredible work on looking at victim issues and looking particularly at victim restitution, but restitution is part of other economic sanctions. And he was sort of ahead of the curve on this stuff, because he was our first embedded academic partner with the research partnership. John Kramer had been executive director. He sort of, when he transitioned over past the commission, he was our first academic partner, but Barry was the first one, from the department, and stayed in that position for quite a long period of time. And again, worked in this area that I think the commission said, well, that's an interesting area, but it wasn't like a high priority. And in the end, it became really important. I mean, first, to take into account in a really deep and meaningful way research into victimization, and then to think about things like restitution as part of the whole structure. And it was not only helpful to the commission and to the field, but it also informed, the General Assembly and courts in their operations. So anyhow, it's a great loss, but it's also, one of those things that I think the commission could be proud of developing a partnership with Penn State and having the ability to take that caliber of a person to work not only with commission staff, but also with the students that we have working for us. So thanks for the opportunity to just mention something about Barry. Some of our condolences.
Okay, my final item relates to an opportunity that presented itself to me and Mark, where we received an inquiry from folks at the United Nations Development Program to host a delegation from Kosovo. And Kosovo is currently working on developing some guidelines, especially as they relate to corruption. And they were really interested in the governance and operation of the Pennsylvania Commission on Sentencing, interested in the training that's provided to judges about guidelines, and interested in SGS Web and our data and the way that we assemble the data and collect the data, interested in our research capacity and the way that we translate and use that to inform practices, but also to review and think about the guidelines themselves by referencing the data. So very briefly, I've been working with Mark on coming up with the agenda for this, and there's three components of this. The first will be a meeting with commission staff at Villanova University Law School, where our former chair, Professor Steve Chanson, will also be meeting with us, talking about those specifics that I just laid out, from training to data to governance, et cetera. The second component will be a visit to the Montgomery County Court of Common Pleas, where Judge Carpenter has agreed to be sort of our point person. We'll be attending a sentencing hearing and then meeting with some district attorneys, defense, and the judge over a lunch session to talk about a number of policies and how guidelines are considered prior to sentencing, what information is given to the judge, and et cetera. And then finally, there'll be a visit to the United States Sentencing Commission, where they'll be meeting with Sentencing Commission staff, but also with Chief Judge Beryl Howell of the United States District Court of the District of Columbia. Again, attending a sentencing hearing, but hearing how they use the federal guidelines. And I just want to note quickly that it's a small delegation, but it's a very impressive delegation that will be joining us. So we'll be joined by the president of the Supreme Court of Kosovo, by the president of the Basic Court of Pristina. Pristina is their capital city, so their largest jurisdiction, their largest court. The acting chief state prosecutor, a judge of the Court of Appeals, and then a legal officer from the Supreme Court, and two representatives from the United Nations Development Program. So I think it's a really wonderful opportunity and something I'm excited to be facilitating, but to take part in. And that is not next week, the following week. So.
And I want to thank Matt for all of his work on this. There's, as you can imagine, a lot of details involved. I mean, helping them to get visas and stuff like that to visit, but you know, a lot of planning. And we have joked a little bit, but we're partly serious about Matt having our international portfolio as part of his job. So maybe that's why he's now the senior deputy director, because he has to work in those international spaces.
Galactic.
Yeah. There we go. So thanks, Matt, for all your work on this.
Yeah, I mean, look, it speaks volumes, but both Matt, to your work history and just the quality of the work that you do here. But I also think it speaks to the broader commission as a whole. I mean, that, you know, they're looking to you and to us to help guide them as they create this. So I think it's a real feather in the cap of the commission, and thank you for working to facilitate this for sure.
As we move to the rest of the agenda, we recognize that we had a pretty long meeting yesterday in terms of talking about each of the units. So there's no action items, so I'll just ask each of the unit managers to, you know, sort of briefly hit their areas and open up for any kind of discussion to the members. So you can quickly go through your agenda stuff, but no need to spend too much time. So.
Well,
Is that positive or negative?
I don't know. I have my notes here.
Oh, well,
Go
through your notes. I just wanted
No, I
to
can
pressure
skip
off.
things.
Yeah. Free form.
You want me to get started? Okay.
Sure, go ahead.
So I just wanted to review the progress on the SGS Web Next Gen project first. So as I discussed yesterday, we started working with JMT Technology Group back in May on the application design and architectural blueprint for the future state of SGS Web. They kind of broke it down into 3 tasks. So we started out by focusing on requirements and kind of expectations for the application. So we did a bunch of workshops, and if you're interested in kind of their findings from that, that's available in the supplemental materials on page 16. They've also been documenting any requirements that they uncovered in a tool called Azure DevOps, which we'll be able to use when we actually start building the application. The second task they focused on was information and system architecture. To this end, they created process flows for kind of all the processes that occur in SGS Web, like sentence guideline generation, sentence submission, revocation, resentencing. But then they also mapped out potential future process flows for parole guidelines, parole decision submission, and recommitment. So those are also available in the supplemental materials on starting on page 51. And then lastly, the other activity they completed was reviewing our technical architecture and proposing a new system architecture, which is also available in the materials on page 45. And the last task that they're currently working on is more focused on the user interface. So as I mentioned yesterday, they're creating a style guide and pattern library for our developers to use. And then they're also creating mock-ups of the future application. Our engagement with them will end in mid-November. So I will plan to share results and outputs maybe in that meeting, in our December meeting, sorry. And then the next phase would be for us to actually start building the application, which again, as I mentioned yesterday, we're going to start working on an RFP in order to find a vendor to help us with that. So I should have more information about that in our December meeting as well. And then, so that's really been our primary focus for the last few months. But we do continue to support and develop the existing version of SGS Web. So we did complete some enhancements to the database admin function, which will make our process easier and less error prone. And so those changes are going live next week. And then we worked on a handful of other issues and bugs reported by the users, but I won't go into the details. They're listed in the notebook materials if you're interested in the details. The only other thing I'll really mention is that, we have been working with the parole board staff to implement the interim parole guidelines, which are expected to go into effect January 1. And they're planning on implementing the parole guideline form in their on-base system and then export data to us. So we'll have to handle that manually at first, and then hopefully in the long term, we can automate a little bit more of it. And then since I always report on SGS Web usage, at the end of June, we had 51,000 sentences that had been submitted with 2022 days of sentence. And just as a comparison, last year at this time, we only had 21,000. So you can see kind of the impact that COVID had and that we are recovering from it. That's it. Is that brief enough? Any questions?
First, that was exceptional. And secondly, I just wanted to take this moment to recognize Christy for having received her Master's of Software Engineering degree in August from Penn State. One of the great things about the affiliation with Penn State is that there are some benefits in terms of tuition discount, but there's also some opportunities for the commission to use our affiliation with Penn State to really encourage and support staff that want to continue their education, but also take advantage of being in a university town and using that as sort of staff development. So it's really this is just one of those examples where Christy took on all the work of it, but we're so proud of her to complete her degree in software engineering, which sounds pretty intimidating, but we think it's a good fit for Christy. And so congratulations, Christy.
Thank you. And I want to thank the commission as well, because in addition to the tuition discount we get, the commission, pays for that extra 25%. So supporting financially as well as, encouraging me to do it was great.
Thank you. Okay. All right, next to Brett.
Yes, so I'm going to start by announcing the hiring of Ted Greenfelder as a research analyst for the commission. Ted was a former PhD candidate with Penn State's criminology and sociology department, and he'll continue working on that degree with us, finishing up his dissertation and utilizing that tuition discount through the partnership with Penn State. And Ted has also been working for the last year for the state of New York, their Division of Criminal Justice. So he's got a lot of great experience and relevant work experience too that would help us out a lot. He'll be starting with us at the end of the month. At June's commission meeting, we presented our findings from our VUFA analysis for House Resolution 111. And just to recap, that was a 5-year study of firearms offenses from 2015 to 2020. And we took a deep dive into charging, prosecution, sentencing, and recidivism related to firearms offenses. Since that commission meeting, we finalized our report and submitted that to the House Judiciary Committee. So that full report is now available. As we mentioned yesterday, we plan to conduct some follow-up studies related to local jurisdictional differences that might have contributed to some of the results we found. We're wrapping up our analysis for the county certification of compliance. Again, this is where we report out to all of the counties on their rate of reporting for the previous year. Looks like 2021 was a strong year for reporting overall, with the overall rate above 95% for the year. Christy and I have collaborated to complete our data management plan. So again, as we've discussed previously, this is an update of all of our data sharing agreements, data management processes, and just sort of modernizing some of our processes as we move into this more virtual working world. I'm also working to complete a research plan that will, similar to what we discussed yesterday, will lay out all of the unit's projects along the timeline that focus on our specific areas of work that are laid out by our mandates. And finally, this fall, we'll be conducting an evaluation of the short sentence parole program at DOC, looking at admissions and cost benefit analysis and a short-term recidivism analysis, looking at the first few months from the first cohort of the program. So I think that wraps it up for me.
That sounds great. Thank you. And just one related item in close consultation with our chairman on the HR 111 report. There's been an effort to try to arrange a presentation to the House Judiciary Committee. And it looks like we have a tentative date. So I'll be working with the two of you to try to make sure that we're available. I checked your calendar. You're good. So I'll have a date for you. So we'll take it from there. Thank you, Brett. Any questions or comments for Brett? I think the final report out is, I think, from our new deputy director. So take whatever time you need.
You said briefly, you're the executive director. Well, I think I just want to start by saying, like, thank you to the chair and vice chair for the interview, and certainly the kind words this morning. It means a lot to me. I appreciate that. And then thank you to the commission for giving me the opportunity to serve in this capacity. And I certainly look forward to the transitions coming forth and all the work that comes with that.
I look forward to that too.
I think I was supposed to say look forward there, but no, I do. And, I know there's a lot ahead of us, and I hope I can provide some stability to those transition periods. Thank you. And I guess then to be brief on the update, because we spent so much time on it yesterday. In your highlight packet, page 45 to 48, are the pieces of information that you see on the screen with a little extra detail. And then if you want more detail in the supplemental materials, page 98 through page 151. And I think the summary here, and I'll see how brief I can be, is that the takeaway just that the unit engaging with counties to support accurate application of the guidelines. And as Brett just noted and Christy mentioned, timely submission of information to the commission. And so really what you see on the front half or the top half of this slide is all the work the unit does. And I have to commend all the members of the unit. We have some newer ones, but I'd like to just say Jen Hutton, Maria Jello, Tom Backett, so, and a newer member, Tiffany Smith, and then obviously Jawan Mitchell in the communication space, because they do a lot of heavy lifting here, and I get the privilege of reporting out on them. So I appreciate all their efforts. And then the second part of the slide is really just about some of those outreach efforts that we talked about yesterday in detail. How do we communicate the work of the commission and keep practitioners across the state apprised of all the work and the decisions that you make as commission members? So there you go. That was pretty.
That's great. We're going to be done before 1, and that's what I promised the chairman. So we all keep our jobs this way. So just a quick policy update. We've spent the last 2 times, or yesterday and this morning, talking about policy issues. So just to recap for the record, the 8th edition sentencing guideline draft will be prepared for the December meeting. We'll provide it to all members prior to the meeting so that they can review it. And then the day before the December meeting, so that Wednesday, we will plan for an afternoon meeting from 1 to 5 so that there's an opportunity to review and vet or modify that so that we can consider it for approval for public hearings during the December business meeting. The 8th edition resentencing guidelines will sort of be done in the same fashion. We'll just look at some of the recommendations we've had, particularly about drug dependency and drug-related offenses, and try to make sure that we're capturing that in any kind of modifications to the resentencing guidelines to provide for you. State parole guidelines, we talked this morning about some brief changes, some technical changes, adding of definitions to what was published previously, and so those will be incorporated, submitted to the Pennsylvania Bulletin through publication, and then submitted to the General Assembly. And that will start at the 90-day review period. And we anticipate that those guidelines will take effect January 1st of next year. And we're working with the parole board on implementing that. The next is the state recommitment ranges, parole recommitment ranges. As I said, I'll be meeting with the parole board next month during their retreat to review those and to come up with recommendations for modified parole recommitment ranges and bring those to the commission for the December meeting. The one thing I'll take into account is we did receive public comment during public hearings about concerns about the recommitment ranges, so I'll try to address those and incorporate those into the draft we'll provide to you. And then the final thing is the pretrial domestic violence risk assessment tool. You may recall that a number of years ago, pre-COVID, we spent 2 years working on this and coming up with a model tool that we could recommend to the General Assembly and to county courts. And we made a decision as the commission about what that model tool was. It's called the DARA. But there were also some limitations or some other recommendations related to that review that we went through in terms of narrowing the focus of what is labeled as domestic violence. Intimate partner violence is much more in line with how these tools operate. And also suggestions about some changes to the legislation to help to promote a better ability to information and to do studies of outcomes for the use of the tool. But COVID disrupted a lot of this, and so just recently, in the last couple of months, the chair and I reconnected with some with staff of the judiciary committees, trying to get a better understanding of issues that we should be continuing to look at, and any kind of mechanism for reporting this to the General Assembly. And so there were a couple of issues that were raised. One was that the commission should revisit this issue because some time has passed, and try to see if there's any other research out there, particularly in the area of child abuse. So when you're thinking about domestic violence, we think about intimate partner violence, but there's also child abuse that could fall under the rubric of domestic violence. And so they ask us to at least look into that because there's a real concern about child sexual abuse, and that we have enhancements for it. And so we agreed to sort of revisit this, spend a couple of months looking at things, and then compile a report with some recommendations that we could submit. And so we're targeting that towards the end of the year. I think some time has passed, so they recognize that nothing's going to happen right away. So If we don't get it in at the end of the year, we could do it, at the start of the session next year. But we'll continue to work on that and engage Brett and Matt in that. And then the final thing is regarding miscellaneous items, and it's about the upcoming meetings. During the December meeting, we developed the schedules for next year to publish our meetings moving forward. And so the sort of the pattern we've had in place is we meet in March, June, September, and December. It's usually a Wednesday, Thursday, and it usually is the first or second week of the month. So what I'll do is ask Kathy to do a doodle poll, get it out to everyone so that we have some sense of days that look generally good or bad for next year. And then we'll put together a proposed meeting agenda for a vote during the December meeting. So I ask, if nothing else, that you just respond to Kathy's doodle poll, and we'll try to find dates that work for everyone or almost everyone. And with that, I'll turn it back to the chair with great pride that it's not even 1:15 as we are done with everything.
All right.
Okay, I think we can still, I'm borrowing that time, and I think it's still an under the deadline.
All right. Well, is there anything else that anybody would like to add? Then we will stand adjourned until the December
Sept,
7th
policy
Sept.
meeting.
policy meeting.